November 19th, 2025. Guys, today we are going to be talking about part 3 of the negative gamma spirit bomb. That's right. The last 2 videos we've been talking about the potential setup for a massive volatility event that could completely unravel markets in a way we have not been previously prepared for. We've had taste for this in the past. GameStop squeeze, UVIX imploding, Ball again happened in 2019, all kinds of small things, but maybe, just maybe, there might be a potential for massive negative gamma squeeze where options completely wreck markets, limit down, 100% up, all kinds of volatility, change in regulations, and just a change in how markets work from then on. Why? Because people can get together and do a thing. They can do a GameStop, they can do an EMC, and potentially be joined by hedge funds or joined by other players, or even accidentally cause a complete meltdown and meltdown in markets. On Monday, we talked about passive investment flows, and we went over Mike Green's, touched on some of Mike Green's points from Simplify Asset Management, talking about the effects of passive flows within the markets, forced buyers and forced sellers. Yesterday, we touched on zero DTEs as the instrument for the market's demise, where, again, forced buyers and sellers on the market maker side, where they might have to hedge by moving the market dramatically in one direction or the other, something that has happened before. And today, we're going to be touching on whether the Fed is truly independent. Lots to go over, so let's start here with a post from Joseph Wang at FedGuy12 on X, who goes over some of the points that I want to consider. All right, starting off here, let's just read his post. This is a post from November 9th, 2024. Actually, give me 1 second here. All right, just making sure that the stream works here. There's two things here.
All right, so we have the wrong microphone here. Let's just test this out one more time. All right, seems to be working. One more. All right, let's get to it. All right, so first off, this is a post from Joseph Wang from November 9th, 2024. Actually, I should start this again because anyways, let's just get to it. This is a post from Joseph Wang in 2024, November 9th. And he says, all this pearl clutching about Fed independence is nonsense. Fed is not independent. It is basically a branch of the Democratic Party. You can see this in many ways. Political donations by Fed employees overwhelmingly go to the Democrats. Former Federal Reserve Bank New York president is comfortable writing columns suggesting Fed conduct policy against Trump. Former Fed chair and Fed vice chair just sliding into senior roles in the Biden White House. Fed chair happily supporting Biden fiscal policy, then feigns ignorance afterwards. Fed making moves on political issues like climate regulations for banks, and Fed staff pumping research on climate change and DEI stuff that just aren't in their mission. I think the Fed would be better served the public if they were more politically balanced. So let's go through a couple of these claims. So the first one here is showing that the donations from people at the Fed just completely outnumber in 2020 and 2024 the donations that they give to Democrats versus the donations they're given to Republicans. So we see that there, and it's corroborated by open secrets as well. We also have, if you go to the next claim, that this is Bill Dudley, former Fed official, former voting member of the Fed, was wrote an op-ed in Politico that was all about this idea of that the Fed should have some sort of effect on the election. Let's just go ahead and read part of this article right here. So this is from Politico. Fed clash with Trump sharpens as former official urges resistance. So the clash between President Donald Trump and the Federal Reserve escalated Tuesday when this was August 27th, 2019. The clash between President Donald Trump and the Federal Reserve escalated Tuesday when a former top Fed official suggested the central bank should work against Trump's reelection. The comment by Bill Dudley, who was president of the powerful New York Fed branch until last year, prompted the Fed to jump into damage control mode, denying that the central bank would play any role in election year politics. In an op-ed for Bloomberg published Tuesday, Dudley said the central bank should not try to offset the economic damage from Trump's trade wars by cutting interest rates, saying that that would allow voters to appreciate the negative effects of the president's policies. Whew. It was a direct rebuke of Trump, who has relentlessly pressed the central bank in recent months to slash interest rates to boost the economy and depress the value of the dollar, which would make U.S. exports cheaper. The Fed cut rates in July for the first time in a decade, citing the adverse effects of trade conflicts as a major reason, and could do so again next month. I understand and support Fed officials' desires to remain apolitical, wrote Dudley, who was vice chairman of the central bank's rate setting committee until mid 2018. But Trump's ongoing attacks on Fed Chairman Jerome Powell and on the institution has made that untenable. Central bank officials face a choice: enable the Trump administration to continue down a disastrous path of trade war escalation, or send a clear signal that if the administration does so, the president, not the Fed, will bear the risks, including the risk of losing the next election, he added. In the final paragraph of the piece, he went further, saying it was arguable that Trump's reelection presented a threat to the U.S. and global economy, to the Fed's independence, and the ability to achieve its employment and inflation objectives. If the goal of monetary policy is to achieve the best long-term economic outcome, the Fed officials should consider how these decisions will affect the political outcome in 2020, he said. The Fed quickly disowned Dudley's comments, saying that they are independent, not making political choices. All right. So this comes from a Fed president, Fed chair. And so if this is what he's saying after he's no longer there, you can imagine what he believed when he was there. And then, back to what we saw there on Twitter, seems to be a blue slant to the Federal Reserve, at least as long as Trump is there. All right. So we continue. So the former Fed chair. So the whole point I'm trying to make here is that the Fed may not be as independent as we think, and that they do make decisions politically, and then some of those decisions might be um, unspoken until well later. So you can imagine these are people just like anyone else, and they do have their mandate and they do have a point of view. And it's hard to say that none of that ever seeps into their decision making. So I want to put in context the cut that we saw. Sorry, the cut that was implied for the Fed in December next month, and how the odds for that has dropped precipitously. I think now we're down to a 42% chance that the Fed is going to cut rates in December, when everyone is fully expecting that they should, because of the economic data, because of the uncertainty, because of the liquidity issues, and the idea that they might not in the midst of all of this makes people think that they are indeed being political. All right, claim 4. Fed chair happily supported Biden's fiscal policy. So the idea here is that the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, publicly supported aggressive fiscal stimulus during COVID-19, the lockdowns that aligned with the Biden policies. And then in October of 2020, Powell called for continued fiscal and monetary support, right? Working together, fiscal and monetary policy working together, stating that there was a low risk of overdoing it. And then later on, when inflation did rise, Powell shifted tone. In a speech testimony from 2023 to 2025, he warned that the U.S. was on an unsustainable fiscal path due to high deficits and debt. And so that, flies into the face of what he was saying before, that, hey, they can do all this fiscal and monetary policy together in order to support whatever the president at the time wanted to do, not standing in the way saying, hey, we can't do that. We need to keep things stable. And look what we saw after. Claim 5. Fed making moves on political issues like climate regulation and banks. So between this, the climate stuff, and the DEI stuff, I remember at the time, even that we were doing this, I could understand why they were doing it, but I was like I can understand why they would want to do it, but it seemed very much a flavor of the moment. This is not something that came independently from them; that they were thinking about this beforehand, and it just coincided coincidentally with the policies that were active at the time. No, this seems to be something that was coming, if not top down, but from the zeitgeist of the moment, which was promptly dropped after Donald Trump became president. So yeah, that leads me to believe that the Fed is not independent, or the level of independence is like super low, and more about for guidance and making us believe that they are, versus them being the case. And the idea here that they're not going to cut in December, it seems a little bit crazy, especially since when we take a look back at past cycles. So this is an indicator I made here just to quickly plot on the chart here. What you see in blue is the effective federal funds rate from the Fed. In red are when Republican presidents are in office, and blue is when Democratic ones are in office. Now you'll notice that once a Republican is in, rates are usually lower afterwards. Republicans in, lower afterwards. When it's a Democrat, rates are higher after. Republican, lower after. And this goes on and on and on and on. So we have here Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush. So Bush Sr. comes in, rates go down. Clinton comes in, rates go up. Bush Jr. comes in, rates go down. Even after rates went up in 2005, 2006, 2007, they went down again even further than they were before, until Obama came into office. Now, Obama's a little bit of an exception, where we had rates flat because we're at the zero interest rate. Oop, 1 second. Hmm, 1 second, folks. Strange. Okay. All right. So, like I was saying, Obama came into office and rates were flat because of the global financial crisis. But then it did go up before the end of Obama's term. Trump came in, rates moved up a little bit, and then, or actually a lot, and then came down. Biden came into the office, rates went back up, and now Trump is in office and rates are coming down. So the idea here is that the pattern is when Democrats are in office, rates go up. When Republicans are in office, rates go down. So the idea here that they would be pausing at this point, and who knows for how long, and how slowly they might walk this down, we're expecting rates to come down pretty precipitously, maybe even down to 2%, even further down. And if that doesn't happen, it's hard to believe that this is not politically motivated. Well, not that it's hard to believe, but if it's happening because it is politically motivated, well, then the Fed is slow walking their responses and adding to the weakening of the markets. But you don't have to take my word for it. If we jump to a quick video here from um, Elizabeth Warren, I thought, surprisingly, that she was very clear in how she explained this. I was actually quite surprised how eloquently she explained this. So let's hear what she has to say.
Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren joins me now. Senator, it's great to have you with us. I want to, for the benefit of my audience, lay down a bit of a track record as we talk about Jerome Powell. Because when he was nominated the first time, you were the only member of the Senate Banking Committee to oppose his nomination. When he was renominated, you were the only member of the Senate Banking Committee again to oppose his nomination. So your record on Jay Powell is clear. Differentiate from my audience what that is and the threat or danger of President Trump issuing veiled and not so veiled threats to fire Jay Powell.
Well, as you've rightly pointed out, I certainly have policy differences with Jay Powell, but I also believe in the independence of the Fed. There's a reason that the president has a whole cabinet, people who serve at his pleasure, people he can hire and fire. But when it comes to the question of the Fed and the other banking regulators, we've really tried to fence them off. And the Fed, to try to keep them out of politics so that they are doing monetary policy, so they're doing big bank supervision without getting tangled in the politics of what a president of the United States wants. So when Donald Trump says that he is going to fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve, which he has said many times over the past few months, the markets respond pretty badly to that because they say that takes away the independence of the Fed. And that's something that will cost all of us. So I have a lot of policy disagreements with Jerome Powell, but he's independent and he gets to make those policy decisions on his own. His job is not at risk.
Speaking of the markets, Senator Warren, they seem to be telling themselves, oh, Trump's just blowing off steam. There's nothing really dangerous here.
You know, I hear the same thing you do, but I'm worried about this at two levels. Yeah, he's just, blowing off steam until the time he's not and actually does it. But the second is, doing this kind of chaos around the Fed is not free. It costs us. Everybody around the world has to make the decision, do I buy U.S. bonds or not? And we saw what happened a couple of months ago when Donald Trump said he was going to fire the chairman of the Fed, and all of a sudden the bond market, the market that says, yes, I believe, when there's trouble, always run to the United States and buy those bonds because the United States is a dependable financial partner. People around the world said, not really. So I think that what Donald Trump is doing is costly right now to our financial system. Day by day.
So she is right to the extent here that what Trump is doing is taking away the power for guidance from the Fed, because people in the rest of the world, including the United States, they're saying, look, we're going to take what Trump is saying more importantly than what Jerome Powell is saying.
By day, every time he pulls this nonsense, he just sets a little more of America's credibility on fire.
Therefore, from your vantage point, if I hear you correctly, Senator Warren, whatever the Fed next does, up or down, will be viewed, at least in part, through the political prism already established by the President of the United States.
Yep, that is part of the problem now. You know, look, I'll say it again. I have stayed after Jerome Powell relentlessly to lower interest rates, but I've tried to persuade him why I thought it was appropriate to lower interest rates. And now we're in a place where Jerome Powell said last month that back in February, he would have lowered interest rates, but for the fact that Donald Trump was creating all this chaos on tariffs. And that made the Fed back off because they said, you're creating this financial uncertainty, and we want to have more flexibility here. And just pause for a minute, because what that means is that every family in America that has a credit card or car loan or other kinds of short-term credit has paid more money.
All right.
More broadly, Senator Warren, evaluate the current state of the Trump economy. The White House says over and over, we're raising about...
All right. Anyways, we don't have to go into that. So you get the idea here. You can watch the rest of the video. But she goes on to explain here, and she's been explaining so far that she's no fan of Powell, whether she is or isn't. She doesn't appear to be a fan of Powell. She hasn't approved his appointment. Yet here, she's supporting him, or if supporting the Fed, because it's in opposition to Donald Trump. So take her individually out of it. This is touching on a sentiment that's there, that the Fed's independence is at risk here. And so the Fed has to do... The Fed just can't take this lying down. They're going to have to do something in order to demonstrate to people that they will not be cowed by Donald Trump. And if that requires pausing on rate cuts, well, it seems to be that they might just do that. And it might be the first time in quite a long time that we've ever seen that with a Republican president. So we have weakness happening in the short term, weakness happening in the long term, instruments for our demise, and so much more. Tomorrow we're going to finish off the fourth version, the fourth installment of the series, putting together a lot of these pieces, and I'll paint the picture for what I think is what we need to pay attention to and what can happen that might cause the financial system to basically completely collapse and be the thing that potentially moves us off to an alternative. Yes, I think in the crypto space, but we'll leave that for tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Tom Hartman, and thank you for watching Daily Bread. See you tomorrow.